David Cameron. He has been bought and paid for by his friends in banking and big business like no other British Prime Minister in history. And he is so arrogant that he doesn't even hide this fact. It started just after the coalition was formed in 2010. But let's go back a bit to when the banks collapsed. The bankers lost. They gambled, they lost. But instead of doing what Iceland did and let the banks fail, it was decided in the UK that the banks were simply too important to allow them to fail. So the UK government bailed them out. By bailing the banks out, the UK government signed every man, woman, child, and even the children yet to be born onto the bankers' gambling debt for years and years to come. Did anybody vote for this? The upshot is that the banks caused the global financial crisis that triggered the recession that produced the deficit. Reports vary as to how much the UK government paid in banker gambling debts, from 850 billion to over 2 trillion, but generally the accepted figure is somewhere in the region of £1 trillion. When the dust settled, the UK government found itself having an 81% stake of the Royal Bank of Scotland and a 33% stake in the Lloyds banking group. In the election year of 2005, the Conservative Party received £2.7 million, or 25% of its total funding, from bankers in the city. In 2010, another election year, this funding from bankers in the city jumped to £11.4 million, or 51% of the Conservative Party's total funding.
Her Majesty the Queen has asked me to form a new government, and I have accepted. Before I talk about that new government, let me say something about the one that has just passed. Compared with a decade ago, this country is more open at home and more compassionate abroad, and that is something we should all be grateful for. And on behalf of the whole country, I'd like to pay tribute to the outgoing Prime Minister.
In October of 2010, once Cameron had settled in as the new British Prime Minister, and after cocaine-snorting, prostitute-loving George Osborne had delivered his emergency budget, axing hundreds of thousands of jobs and cutting benefits to the most needy, it was reported that Cameron and Osborne would let the banks off £19 billion in future taxes by offsetting it against losses despite being bailed out. Was this merely a coincidence, or did Cameron do this as a thank you to his banker chums for funding 50% of his election campaign? Regardless of the fact that the state owned a large part of the Royal Bank of Scotland and Lloyds banking group, following the bailout, the government decided against interfering with the bonuses they paid their bankers for their performance. The argument was that if you curb the bankers' bonuses, then this banking talent will leave the country and work elsewhere. This was an incredibly square peg trying to be forced into a very round hole, because wasn't it this very same banking talent that caused the credit crunch in the first place. A few corners of the media did in fact point this out, but generally people moaned to each other about those bloody bankers, but few actually took a stand. However, as the public anger over banker bonuses increased over time, what was the response by David Cameron and George Osborne to the rising tide of anger? Well, they cut the 50% tax rate, giving many of these bankers a £40,000 a year tax cut. But worse than that, Cameron, Osborne and that buffoon Boris Johnson actually went to war with the European Union after the European Union wanted to introduce a 200% of salary banker bonus cap. So the bankers, under David Cameron's premiership, have been let off $19 billion in future taxes. They've been allowed to carry on gambling regardless, no one getting in trouble for the banking collapse, the LIBOR scandal, the PPI mis-selling scandal, or for laundering billions of Mexican drug money. They have been allowed to keep their bonuses, meaning bankers can now run amok, knowing they have the full support of the Prime Minister, and the bankers in the city did all this for only £11.4 million. In January 2014, the following article appeared in the Telegraph. 43 million given to Conservatives by members of exclusive Cameron Dining Club. Members of a dining club with private access to David Cameron and other cabinet ministers have given £43 million to the Conservatives in just 2 years. The details were revealed following criticism over Downing Street's refusal this week to say how many secret guests David Cameron has hosted at his grace and favour country home, Chequers. The leaders group is made up of donors who each give at least £50,000 to the Conservative Party every year and are rewarded with private dinners, lunches and drinks parties with the Prime Minister and other influential ministers. So our Prime Minister has been caught selling himself and his cabinet for donations to his party. Isn't there a word for that type of work? But as many coincidence theorists would suggest, I am sure that the secret list of people would never pay this money to influence Cameron and his party's decisions in any way, shape or form. It's just a mere coincidence that the people's business will benefit greatly after the donation to Cameron's party. You will be deemed a conspiracy theorist to even suggest otherwise. In a so-called democracy, the very thought of a secret list of people meeting and influencing the Prime Minister with payments to his party is repugnant, and should tell you all you need to know about the crony capitalists who receive corporate welfare having bought Cameron off. And that brings me to Cameron selling off the NHS to his friends. Furious Tory party donors are handed NHS contracts worth £1.5 billion under health reforms. These are the companies that helped the Conservative Party reorganise its healthcare policy. Circle Health have received contracts worth £1.36 billion after several of its investors gifted the Conservative Party £1.5 million. Not a bad return. Maybe they did it at one of Cameron's cosy little Bullingdon Club boys only evenings at Chequers. Who knows? UK Care were awarded contracts worth £102.6 million after slipping Cameron's party over £247,000 in contributions. All that will happen once Cameron's buddies get their grubby little mitts on the NHS is that the cost to the government will go through the roof. The care will get worse as more and more pressure is heaped on an already overworked staff, and waiting times will get even longer. But Cameron's buddies will see their share price increase, and they will make millions and be held in the media as entrepreneurial geniuses. But the media will not mention that it was crony capitalism that got them the contracts. It's corporate welfare, nothing more, nothing less. Cameron is being used as a political whore, the worst and most obvious this country has ever seen, and he isn't even ashamed about it. But then because journalists are so incredibly spineless, he knows he can get away with it. We deserve better than this, don't we? The only way things will improve is if people wake up and start becoming involved with their country's future. Stop thinking you aren't important. Stop thinking in terms of little old me. Stop allowing yourself to be run over by politicians and big business because you think there is nothing you can do. But first, you've got to get mad. So very mad at what the politicians and big business are doing to you, your family, and your country. Then it's time to put down the Xbox. Yes, put down the Xbox. It's time to turn off the soap operas and to take a good look into your children's eyes and see their innocence, their beauty, and realise their future is nothing if we don't fight for them now. Do it for them. Fight for them, for their future. If you're too lazy to fight for your own, you owe them that at least. Stand up and realise the potential you have to change things around you. The time has come to no longer accept our politicians and big business robbing us and lining their own pockets at our expense. Enough. Enough.